In the serene mountains of rural Montana, critical decision loomed at the North American Wildlife Conservation Center. A tiny lion cub named Leo, removed from his pride after failing to thrive, lay curled in the corner of his enclosure, refusing food. His golden coat dulled, his spirit broken by isolation. Veterinarians and handlers watched helplessly as conventional methods failed, their hope dwindling with each passing day. Out of options, a radical, almost unthinkable idea emerged. Max, a rescued bobcat, kitten, tiny, wild, and equally alone. Two orphaned predators from entirely different worlds. A relationship that defied natural order and scientific expectation. What began as a desperate last resort evolved into something that stunned even the most experienced wildlife experts. When these two cats met as cubs, no one could have predicted what would happen when Leo grew to 400 lb, while Max remained just 30. What happens when a creature built for stealth and solitude meets the future king of the savannah? This is the true story of an unlikely connection that not only born from desperation but also changed our understanding of what's possible when the wild heart finds its perfect companion. The early morning sunlight filtered through the tall pine surrounding the North American Wildlife Conservation Center in rural Montana. Dawn had barely broken, but Dr. Sarah Mitchell was already making her rounds. The veterinarian's footsteps echoed softly against the concrete paths as she approached the nursery section, clipboard in hand. Today would be different from her usual routine. The staff had been preparing for this moment for weeks. "How's our little patient doing?" Sarah asked, stepping into the climate-controlled room, where Marianne, one of the Scent's most experienced animal handlers, was monitoring a tiny lion. "Cub not great," Marianne replied, her voice tinged with concern. "His temperature stabilized, but he still won't eat properly." She gestured toward the small golden body curled in the corner of the heated enclosure. "Third day in a row he's barely touched his formula." Sarah knelt beside the enclosure, observing the cub. At just 8 weeks old, Leo was significantly smaller than his litter mates, his golden fur dull compared to their vibrant coats. Born to the Scent's resident lions, Nala and Simba, Leo had been the runt of the litter of 4, noticeably smaller and less robust than his siblings from birth. "I was afraid of this," Sarah sighed, making notes on her clipboard. "It's not just physical. Anymore, the separation from his family is taking a toll." The decision to remove Leo from his mother and siblings hadn't been made lightly. After weeks of observation, it became clear that the small cub wasn't thriving in the pride environment. His siblings, boisterous and growing rapidly, inadvertently pushed him aside during feeding times. His mother, though attentive, couldn't compensate for his struggles. When Leo developed a respiratory infection, Sarah had made the difficult choice to move him to the nursery for specialized care. The infection had cleared with medication, but Leo's spirit seemed broken by the isolation. Lions were social creatures, and despite the staff's round-the-clock attention, human companionship couldn't replace the complex bonds of his own kind. "Have you heard back from any of the other facilities?" Marianne asked, referring to their search for potential companion cubs from other conservation centers. Sarah shook her head. "No matches. There aren't any lion cubs his age, currently in need of hand-rearing. We could try introducing him to the older juveniles in a few months, but he might not make it a few months without turning this around." Marianne finished grimly. The door to the nursery opened, and Mark Henderson, the Scent's director, stepped in. At 65, Mark had dedicated over 40 years to wildlife conservation and rehabilitation. Deep lines etched his weathered face, evidence of both Montana's harsh sun and decades of emotional investment in the animals under his care. "I might have a solution," he said, his deep voice disrupting the somber mood. "It's unorthodox, but I just got off the phone with Cedar Ridge Sanctuary in Idaho." Sarah raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "They've got a bobcat kitten rescued after a logging operation. Disturbed its den. Mother nowhere to be found, probably scared off by the machinery. He's about 6 weeks old, healthy, but needs socialization, a bobcat." Sarah's brow furrowed. As a companion for Leo, it wouldn't be the first cross-species bond we've facilitated. Mark reminded her, remember the cheetah Cuban, that Anatolian shepherd puppy at San Diego? But a bobcat and a lion, they'd never encounter each other in the wild, Sarah's concern was evident, and their size difference will be enormous as they mature. True, but right now they're both cubs in need of companionship. They're both cats with similar play behaviors and social needs at this stage. Mark's voice carried the confidence of experience. The Bobcat's arrival would be temporary, just until Leo's strong enough to reintegrate with other lions. By then, the Bobcat will be ready for their native species rewing program. Sarah glanced back at Leo, who hadn't moved from his dejected position. The cub's eyes were open, but vacant, his small chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. They were running out of options. "What's the Bobcat's name?" she asked. Finally, Mark smiled gently. They've been calling him Max. 2 days later, a transport van from Cedar Ridge Sanctuary pulled into the Conservation Sense service entrance. Sarah and Mark stood waiting as Tina Blackfeather, a wildlife rehabilitator of Blackfeet heritage, emerged from the driver's side. "Good to see you again, Tina." Mark greeted her with a firm handshake. "How was the drive?" "Hours of Montana backrows with a vocal bobcat kitten," Tina replied with a wry smile. "Let's just say we both need to stretch our legs." She moved to the back of the van and opened the doors, revealing a secure transport crate. Inside, a small, spotted form pace, restlessly, occasionally emitting high-pitched mews of displeasure. "He's actually been great, all things considered," Tina said, lifting the crate. "Carefully, healthy appetite, good energy, just not a fan of carrots." Sarah peered into the crate, assessing the bobcat kitten. Max was all spotted fluff and oversized paws, his tufted ears alert as he sniffed in her direction. Despite his wild heritage, there was something undeniably adorable about his kitten-like proportions and the black lines accentuating his expressive face. "He's beautiful," Sarah said sincerely. "Has he had much human contact?" "Minimal," Tina confirmed. "We've handled him only for feeding and health checks. The goal was always to turn him to the wild eventually, but he needs social development with other felines first. And our other bobcat rehabs are adults." They made their way to a specially prepared room adjacent to Leo's nursery. The two spaces were connected by a large viewing window and a small door that could be opened when the staff decided it was time for direct interaction. "Let's get Max settled before any introductions," Mark suggested. "He's had enough stress for one day." Tina placed the crate in the center of the room and carefully opened its door. Max remained inside, crouched defensively, his blue-gold eyes taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. "It's all right, little one," Tina murmured. "This is just temporary, a stepping stone on your journey home." Eventually, Max ventured out, moving with the cautious, deliberate steps typical of wild felines. He explored the perimeter of the room, sniffing intensely at each new scent, his small body tense with alertness. "He seems comfortable enough," Sarah observed. "Should we let Leo see him?" Mark nodded, and they moved to Leo's enclosure. The lion cub was in the same position as that morning, barely acknowledging their presence. Sarah gently lifted him, noting with concern how little resistance he offered, and carried him to the viewing window. At first, Leo's eyes remained unfocused, his small body limp in Sarah's arms. Then through the glass, Max turned and locked eyes with the lion cub. Something flickered in Leo's gaze, the faintest spark of interest. "Well, I'll be," Mark whispered. "That's the most response we've seen in days." Leo's ears twitched forward, and he raised his head slightly, watching as Max continued his exploration on the other side of the glass. For the first time since his isolation began, the lion cub seemed aware of his surroundings. "Let's take this slowly," Sarah cautioned, though hope had crept into her voice. "We'll let them observe each other for a few days before any physical interaction." But fate, or rather Max's determined curiosity, had other plans. The following morning, Sarah arrived early to check on both cubs, only to find the center abuzz with activity. Marianne intercepted her in the hallway, her expression a mix of alarm and amusement. "You're not going to believe this," she said, guiding Sarah quickly toward the nursery. "Max escaped his enclosure last night. Security footage shows him squeezing through a ventilation grate we didn't think was large enough for him to fit through." Sarah's heart sank. "Did he get outside? How far could he have gone?" Marianne shook her head. "That's just it. He didn't leave. He found his way into Leo's room instead." They reached the viewing window, and Sarah gasped at the sight before her. There, in Leo's heated bed, the two cubs were curled together in sleep. Max's spotted body pressed against Leo's golden fur as if sensing their presence. Max opened, one eye gave a leisurely stretch, then settled back against his new companion. They've been like that since we found them at 500A. First, sir, Marianne explained. We debated separating them, but she gestured at the peaceful scene. Leo's breathing better, Sarah observed, noting the deeper, more relaxed rhythm of the lion cub's chest. His color looks improved, too. Mark joined them, coffee in hand. I've contacted Tina. She agrees we should let this play out. Monitor them closely. Of course, Sarah watched the cubs for a long moment. Everything in her veterinary training warned about the unpredictability of wild animals, especially predators from different species. And yet the scene before her defied conventional wisdom. There was something undeniably right about the comfort the two small bodies seemed to find in each other. All right, she conceded, but I want round-the-clock observation and was separate. Them at the first sign of trouble, however, seemed the furthest thing from either cub's mind. When they finally woke, Max was the first to stir, climbing playfully over Leo's larger form. To the staff's delight, Leo responded with mild interest, batting half-heartedly. At the Bobcat kitten by afternoon, Leo had accepted his first full feeding in days, lapping formula from a bowl, while Max watched with curious intensity. When Leo finished, Max approached, cautiously sniffing at the lion's muzzle in what appeared to be approval. It's like he's encouraging him, Marianne remarked, watching through the window. Sarah nodded, making notes on her tablet. Cats often groom each other as a social bonding behavior. Max is mimicking that instinct even though they're different species. Over the next few days, Leo's transformation was remarkable. The previously lethargic cub began responding to Max's playful overtures, first with tentative paw swipes, then with more engage at wrestling. Though still smaller than he should have been for his age, Leo's appetite improved steadily, and with it, his strength. Max, for his part, seemed to thrive in his role as companion. The Bobcat kitten demonstrated surprising patience, adapting his playstyle to accommodate Leo's limitations. When Leo tired, Max would curl up beside him, his steady presence seemingly comforting to the lion cub. 3 weeks after Max's arrival, Sarah sat in her office reviewing the cub's progress charts with a sense of cautious optimism. Leo had gained nearly 2 lubs, still behind the growth curve for a male lion his age, but a significant improvement. His blood work showed stronger immune markers, and his activity levels had increased exponentially. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she called, expecting one of the handlers. Instead, Congressman James Wilson entered, followed closely by Mark. The representative from Montana's Western District was a key supporter of conservation funding and made quarterly visits to the center. Dr. Mitchell Wilson greeted her warmly. Mark's been telling me about your innovative approach with the lion cub. Mind if I see the unlikely duo? Sarah led them to the observation area, outside what had become known as the cub's room. Inside, Leo and Max were engaged in a game of tag, darting around enrichment structures designed to encourage climbing and stalking behaviors. Remarkable, Wilson commented, watching Leo pounce somewhat clumsily after the more agile Bobcat. And you say they found each other, in a manner of speaking. Sarah, replied Max, made the first move, but Leo was receptive from the start. Wilson observed thoughtfully. You know, there's a powerful message here. 2 native North American cats, 1 indigenous one, introduced tour ecosystems through human intervention, finding common ground. It's almost symbolic. Mark nodded. We've been documenting their interaction for research purposes, but their story has therapeutic applications too. Children facing medical challenges have been particularly responsive to updates about Leo's progress. I can imagine, Wilson said. Have you considered making their story more public? This kind of positive conservation narrative could help with funding and awareness. Sarah hesitated. While she understood the public relations value, her primary concern remained the cubs' welfare. We're still monitoring their development. Lion cubs typically remain with their mothers for about 2 years in wild conditions. We don't want to disrupt their bond prematurely for publicity. Of course, Wilson agreed, but perhaps a carefully managed introduction to the public, limited viewing hours, educational context. The conversation continued as they watched the cubs play, unaware of the plans being formulated around their unusual friendship. By the 6-month mark, both Leo and Max had grown significantly. Leo, though still smaller than average for his age, had developed a stronger build and the beginnings of what would eventually become a man. Soft tufts of darker fur around his face. Max, true to his species, remained considerably smaller, but had developed the muscular, compact form characteristic of bobcats. Their enclosure had been expanded to include an outdoor area where they could experience natural weather and terrain under supervision. The staff had expected some friction as the cubs matured and their instincts evolved, but remarkably their bond only seemed to strengthen. They hunted enrichment toys together, shared food without conflict, and still slept, curled together. Despite Leo's increasing size, word of their friendship had spread beyond the conservation center, thanks partly to Congressman Wilson's enthusiasm. A children's book author had reached out requesting permission to create a story based on Leo and Max. Several wildlife magazines had published features. A documentary crew had even spent 2 weeks filming their daily activities. Sarah maintained strict protocols around these interactions, always prioritizing the cubs' well-being over publicity opportunities. But even she couldn't deny the positive impact their story was. Having visitor donations had increased substantially, and several schools had initiated Leo and Max friendship clubs that raised funds for wildlife conservation. The real test came in the form of Kesha Williams, an 8-year-old from Billings, who'd been diagnosed with leukemia through the Make-A-Wish Foundation. She had requested to meet the famous feline friends who had helped her through difficult treatments. Leah Wasik, too, she explained to Sarah during her visit, her small frame dwarfed by her protective mask and the large observation window. But he got better because he had a friend. I have friends at the hospital, too. Sarah had carefully prepared both cubs for the unusual visitor, and they responded with remarkable gentleness, approaching the window, where Kesha stood with unhurried curiosity. When Leo pressed his paw against the glass directly opposite her hand, there wasn't a dry eye among the staff present. These moments reinforced Sarah's belief in the healing power of their unusual companionship, not just for the animals themselves, but for the humans who witnessed their story. The decision to eventually separate Leo and Max always loomed on the horizon. As Leo approached his first birthday, discussions about his reintegration with other lions grew more frequent and more heated. He needs to develop proper lion social behaviors, argued Damien, one of the senior zoologologists. The longer we wait, the harder it will be. But his bond with Max is the foundation of his recovery. Sarah countered, severing it prematurely could undo all our progress. These debates took place behind closed doors, away from the public's adoring gaze. The reality was more complex than the heartwarming story presented on the Sense website. Lion conservation depended on successful breeding programs which required properly socialized males. Max, meanwhile, was originally destined for eventual release into the wild, a goal that became more complicated with each passing month of captive bonding. The turning point came unexpectedly when a young female lion named Kiara arrived from a conservation center in Colorado. At 14 months old, she had been raised in a pride setting but required relocation due to facility restructuring. Initially housed in a separate area, she and Leo could see and smell each other across a divider. Leo's reaction surprised everyone. While he remained deeply attached to Max, he showed unmistakable interest in Kiara, spending hours watching her and vocalizing in her direction. It was the first time he had responded to another lion since his separation from his family. "This might be our opening," Mark suggested during a staff meeting. A gradual transition rather than an abrupt separation. The plan they developed was careful and methodical, short supervised introductions between Leo and Kiara, always with Max present initially, gradually increasing their time together while ensuring Max had his own secure space. The first meeting was tense. Kiara, larger than Leo despite being female, approached with confidence. Leo positioned himself protectively near Max, who watched the proceedings with typical bobcat wariness. To everyone's relief, Kiara showed no aggression toward either of them. After the initial cautious circling and sniffing, she seemed to accept the unusual pair, even joining their play sessions with surprising adaptability. Over the following weeks, a new dynamic emerged. Leo divided his time, between Max and Kiara, developing distinct relationships with each. With Max, he maintained the comfortable familiarity of their long-standing bond. With Kiara, he explored new aspects of lion behavior, vocalizations, and social rituals that Max couldn't teach him. He's building a bridge between worlds, Tina observed during one of her visits to check on Max's progress. It's not what we planned, but it might be exactly what both of them needed indeed. Max, too, was changing as he matured. He demonstrated increasing independence, sometimes choosing to explore alone or observe from elevated perches, rather than always engaging directly with Leo. Yet he always returned to their shared sleeping spot. By nightfall, almost 2 years after their first meeting, the North American Wildlife Conservation Center hosted a special event, The Unlikely Friends. 2 years together, celebration attracted supporters, media, and a now healthy Kesha Williams, who cut the ribbon on a new educational center named in honor of Leo and Max. Behind the scenes, Sarah reviewed her notes one final time before addressing the gathered guests. The past 2 years had challenged everything she thought she knew about feline behavior, rehabilitation. The data they had gathered would inform wildlife management practices for years to come. Leo, now a young adult lion with a developing mane, had successfully integrated with a small pride, Kiara, and 2 other females recently introduced to the habitat. Yet his special bond with Max remained unbroken. The Bobcat, now fully grown at about 30 verbarb to Leo's 400, still had special access to Leo's enclosure through a passage too small for the lions to use. Visitors delighted in spotting Max perched regally on a high rock overlooking Thelian habitat, or occasionally in the early morning still curled up beside Leo in the morning sun. The sense cameras had captured countless moments of their continued companionship. Mutual grooming sessions, shared naps, and even collaborative hunts of enrichment toys. As Sarah prepared to share their story with the assembled crowd, she reflected on the lesson at its heart. Conservation was ultimately about connections between animals, ecosystems, and humans. Leo and Max had reminded everyone that these connections often transcended the boundaries humans tried to impose. The 2 cats who met as cubs, in desperate circumstances, had not only saved each other, but had become ambassadors for a more compassionate understanding of wildlife. Their story had raised over $2 million for conservation efforts across North America and inspired numerous children facing their own challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah began her address as images of Leo and Max through the seasons played on screens behind her. 2 years ago, we took a chance on the healing power of companionship. What we witnessed was nothing short of remarkable. In the habitat nearby, unaware of the celebration in their honor, Leo stretched out in the autumn sunshine. Max appeared silently on a branch above, him surveying their shared territory before leaping down to join his unlikely brother. The lion acknowledged the Bobcat with a gentle nudge, and together they watched the horizon, their improbable friendship a testament to the unexpected harmony that could exist between different worlds. Later that evening, after the crowds had departed, Sarah made a final check on the animals. The lions were settled in their night quarters, but Max was still outside, seemingly waiting. "Come on, buddy," she called softly. "Timto, come in." The Bobcat gave her a measuring look, then deliberately walked to the small entry that connected to Leo's enclosure. He paused there, glancing back at Sarah with what she could have sworn was satisfaction before disappearing inside to find his friend. Sarah smiled, closing her notebook. Some bonds, it seemed, were simply meant to last regardless of the natural order humans expected to observe, and in that truth lay hope for all species trying to find their way forward together on a changing planet.